really, really bear down on that question, what is the ultimate determinant of health and well-being? The answer comes back: community, the depth of one's social connections. We need to build the capacity as humans to bring ourselves back to center, to emotionally regulate, to find psychological homeostasis. Because the world right now, or I would say kind of the attention economy or the persuasion economy, is out to trigger you. And so this is why I think mindset, really, the ability to train your mind to move itself back to a state of equilibrium is maybe the most important protocol, because every experience of reality is perceived through the prism of our minds. Mm-hmm. What I have dedicated myself largely to, unwittingly, is bringing people together in connection, is because I had this experience as a child, knowing how profoundly important it is to belong.
Welcome to the Heal with Kelly podcast. I'm Kelly Noonan-Gorse, and every week I speak to the leading doctors, healers, spiritual teachers, and scientists to find out what is truly possible when it comes to healing. I also interview real people with extraordinary healing stories. My philosophy is, what's possible for one is possible for all. Thank you for joining me on this beautiful journey of remembering our divine nature and tapping into the truths that shall set us free. Hey everyone, and welcome to the Heal with Kelly podcast. I am your host, Kelly Gorse, and I'm here today with my good friend, Jeff Krasno. And this is like one of the conversations I look forward to because it's just, I get to hang out with my friend.
Well, I hope I don't disappoint.
Yeah, you never do, because Jeff is one of my favorite writers. He has a newsletter that you all need to sign up for, and he's got these commusings that he sends out. Do you still send them out?
I do,
because
yeah.
We'll talk about the commitment you made. But honestly, every time I think I've responded to you a couple of times, but I'm just like, dude, you are the best writer ever. So let me tell you a little bit about Jeff. For those who don't know, he is the co-founder and CEO of Commune, a masterclass platform for personal and societal well-being, and co-creator of Wanderlust, which is huge, a global series of wellness events. He hosts the Commune Podcast, of which I was a guest back in the day, interviewing a wide variety of luminaries from Deepak Chopra and Marianne Williamson to Matthew McConaughey.
And Kelly Gorse.
Thank you. Luminary, that's a stretch, but we've got aspirations. His latest venture expands Jeff's personal story and protocols into a book, which is a must-read, a must-buy, because how many podcast episodes have you had?
My own podcast, you mean? Yeah, 700 now.
700.
Yeah.
So I feel like, and we'll talk about where this book came from, but I feel like you've taken so much wisdom and distilled it down to like what is the gold nuggets of how to stay healthy in mind, body, and spirit. So good stress, the health benefits of doing hard things, which we are all involuntarily doing every day. It explores deliberate, self-imposed behaviors that promote social, psychological, and physical well-being, offering both a philosophical exploration of true wellness and practical steps to achieve it. Jeff, welcome.
What a treat, Kelly. Thanks for having me here. I do really appreciate this opportunity, not only to be with you, but to be with the amazing Heal community that you've been building over so many years. It's so impressive, and I see you. I see your work.
Thank you. Yeah. To be seen. We talked about this last night. We hung out at a dinner you invited me to talk about community building. When I did Heal, I did not realize that that's what would come of it. We have such wonderful listeners and followers. Shout out to all of you listening right now that were inspired by the power that they have within them. And your gift, your superpower, I think, is community building and bringing people together. And I was fortunate enough to be one of those people last night at this extraordinary dinner at your house. And both of us are tired today because of it. Thank you. But I guess let's start with what inspired this book.
Yeah. Well, just to speak to community really quickly.
Yeah, maybe we should start there.
It's an oft underappreciated element of well-being. And it took me a long time to really appreciate it deeply, because we do talk about all of these physiological protocols, fasting and cold water therapy and light therapy and resistance training, and all of those are incredibly important, and we can go into why and how. But everyone really that I've talked to, when I really bear down on that question, what is the ultimate determinant of health and well-being, the answer comes back: community, the depth of one's social connections. There's a really interesting guy that I interviewed, I think his name is Bob Waldinger, who ran the longest longitudinal study on human happiness at Harvard, where they followed from 1938 on Harvard sophomores throughout their whole entire life. And there was, I think, 275 of them. And they would query them, every year or two. And ironically, my wife Skylar's grandfather was one of them. Wow. John F. Kennedy was another one, actually. Cool. And we would help him in his later years fill out some of this paperwork. He wasn't actually happy to hear that, Bob Waldinger. And I asked Bob, I was like, so now you've got 80 years of data. What is the number one determinant of people's well-being and longevity? And without a single pause, without any hesitation, the depths of one's social bonds.
Wow, I know.
And so I think this is why fostering containers for people to come together is one of the most important things, that we can do. And oddly, for me, this was a product of a really difficult and peripatetic childhood. I was chasing my parents, or being toted around by them, to country after country as a young boy. And of course, it was marvelous to discover all sorts of cultures, and the left side of my brain was like a compost flowering garden for language and culture and whatnot. But I was a chubby kid, and I was getting moved from school to school, having to learn new languages and sort of squirm my way into cliques of friends. And that was really difficult for me. And I became sort of the consummate perpetual people pleaser, because I would do anything. I would compromise any authentic component of myself in order to fit into the group. Mm-hmm. And because I viscerally had the deep experience of having to fit in, I think over time I was able to transmute that shortcoming, if you will, that foible, into a superpower. Mm. And it wasn't until I was sitting with Gabor Mate, who we both know, and he started to query me on, my different business endeavors and stuff. So he's like, well, what did you do when you kind of came out of school? I was like, well, I was doing big music concerts and big festivals. And he's like, oh, so you're bringing people together. I was like, oh yeah. And then what did you do? Well, then my wife and I started Wanderlust. She's like, what was that? I was like, well, there were these huge community gatherings around wellness and stuff. She's like, oh, so you were bringing people together. I was like, oh, yeah, I suppose I was. He said, what are you doing now? I said, well, I have a business called Commune. And we both started laughing. And, he opened my eyes to this thread that wove through the tapestry of my life, that what I have dedicated myself largely to, unwittingly, is bringing people together in connection. And I think the reason why I have done that is because I had this experience as a child, knowing how profoundly important it is to belong. Mm. And I get a lot of gratification out of it. I think we all do, sitting around a table, really connecting with one another. Yeah. And being all there for each other. So this is a really massively important part of what it is to be well.
Yeah. And I feel like, when we need to belong too, because of this ancient survival thing of like, if we are cast out of the village will be out with, in the hostile environment with saber-toothed tigers, and we will die. So there's a lot to be said about how scary and detrimental to our health isolation is.
Yeah, I mean, we know this by dint of, just imagine getting lost in the woods. Would you rather get lost in the woods alone or with a group? I mean, it's obvious, right?
A group.
And I think another kind of satori that Gabor opened me up to was this idea that if you mapped the entire course of human history across a day, we lived communally for 23 hours and 54 minutes of it. So we evolved in relationship to community in tribes of 70 or 80 people with mutual interdependence and accountability. And it didn't mean that we didn't have conflict. We did have conflict, but we had to solve that conflict right here, face to face, find common ground, recognize each other's humanity, find the middle. And of course, we've lost that in our society. So many of us are atomized and lonely, and our public discourse has essentially devolved to throwing vitriolic barbs over anonymously as sort of digital warriors over social media.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that a little bit, because our probably initial magnetism to social media and Instagram and Facebook, like, oh my gosh, connection, and we feel so connected and we know what's going on in each other's lives, but there's something so stressful about it, because it is false, and there are bots, and there is so much negativity being spewed from a basement behind a screen or something.
Yeah, and the content on it is algorithmically preferenced for the hyperbole and the salaciousness and the scandal. And the incentives there are so perverse, because it's so easy to fall down that trap where all you do is create a false reality of yourself, or, lean into the sensationalism of tickling human negativity bias to constantly incite outrage or fear or anger for the mere purposes of accruing followers or ad revenue. And so this attention, and this is the death trap of dopamine foraging.
Death trap of dopamine foraging. See, your writing, your language is so good. There was words that you used earlier that I don't even know. It was about your childhood. Peripatetic?
Yeah, peripatetic.
Define, please. We're all going to learn here.
I think that's wandering or meandering. Okay. But of course, I tend to misuse words, so everyone can fact check me too.
Okay, I love it.
And that's how you grow. You grow by making mistakes.
Which is that good stress? Yeah, trying things and failing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's how we learn. We actually learn through making mistakes.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't actually address that specifically in the book, but I've tried to learn new things in midlife. Like I sat down November 10th, 2016, and asked myself, what made America great in the first place? And there's many, many good answers for that. But my answer was the Great American Songbook. This was our indigenous music written by, the likes of Billy Strayhorn and Duke Ellington, and played on the radio for decades and decades, and people, regardless of color or creed or socioeconomic status, all knew those songs, Satin Doll, etc. So I vowed that I would teach myself how to play the American Songbook, one song at a time. So I embarked on that mission in 2016 of learning how to play jazz piano from scratch. And yeah, it was difficult. It was hard. But it was through the endless producing of mistakes that I actually learned and got better. And of course, this is mimicked in nature. Like nature is an absolutely perfect architect, but very imperfect carpenter. It makes mistakes. Physiologically, we know those mistakes as mutations or single nucleotide polymorphisms. And often that just predisposes us to illness, but every once in a while, those mistakes are actually beneficial for our species, and nature selects for the best of them and iterates and pushes us forward as a species. And this is why it is so important that we trust nature and we trust ourselves as part of it, knowing that we will make mistakes. I mean, I literally don't know the next word that's going to come out of my mouth, but I've learned to trust it, because in the making of the mistakes, which I will inevitably make many, many times in this interview, I do propel myself forward in some way. And then more neurologically, it is those mistakes and the endless creation of them, and then the landing on the thing that produces this massive Vesuvius of dopamine that is this reward and motivation that then presses us forward. So there is actually a neurochemical component to making mistakes, which I think is quite fascinating. But, most of the time we're taught to distrust nature. Certainly distrust ourselves as nature.
Yes. I feel some Zach Bush influence
there.
Yeah,
yeah. Absolutely. He's been a huge influence in that respect.
Yeah.
It's been riddled through history, certainly in our Abrahamic traditions, to distrust nature, but also just in the last 150 years of Western allopathic medicine, to look at nature as, oh, well, man, that comes up as pests and weeds, so let's spray it with chemicals and kill it all off. Or maybe it comes up as a saber-toothed tiger, and we'll kill all the megafauna of the world. We did that for like thousands and thousands of years. All those giant sloths and bears and massive birds and saber-tooths, they're all gone.
Yeah.
And then Louis Pasteur came along, kind of discovered germ theory, and said, no, it's not just the big things that can kill you off, it's the little things that you can't see. And then the last 150 years has been a foray into killing those things off, everything smaller than us, the bacteria and the viruses in our soil and our guts, etc. And I think this is really, when you extend that to what it is to be human, we're also taught to distrust the part of ourselves that is nature, human nature, because it's susceptible to vice, it's sinful, it's apt to eat too much chocolate cake and drink too much booze and watch too much porn or something,
Yeah.
But really we are nature. That is at the core of who we are. All this cognitive stuff that we create as a layer on top of it is just fluff and nutter.
And I would say, like, nature, we think of like, okay, the trees, the ocean, the sun, the cells, but it's actually, we're talking about the architect is the intelligence behind it and That's consciousness. Right. So it's like, as you're talking about, making the mistakes, and you're consciously learning something and making mistakes and failing forward and, applying good stress so that you can expand your, gifts and abilities. It's like consciousness is constantly learning. We're just different iterations of consciousness, as is nature, as is evolution. And so it's learning through its self-expression, and things are going to collide and things are going to make mistakes, and then things are going to mutate, and people are going to get sick, and the strongest, the fire is going to happen and the sequoia is going to thrive, whatever it is. It's like fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, we are essentially what you said, animated information here for a very, very short period of time for the purposes of connection, such that this whole massive experiment of the universe can iterate and move forward. It's, quite amazing to step back and to try to see and understand your life as a bigger project in that way, to really grasp the notion that you are this link in this continuous chain of captured sunlight. You're here for this very, very, very brief moment in time. And when you begin to see yourself in that context, it becomes very singular, the question that you ask yourself. You'll be, for this brief moment of illumination, how brightly will I shine? How deeply will I connect?
So I know you talked about people pleasing, and like, I think that's it. It's like trusting. For me right now, the work is like letting go of judgment of myself as I'm making mistakes, as I'm like, and really surrendering and trusting in this intelligence and the consciousness and what's moving through me. And then like, it's got to go through the filters of my ego and conditioning, and like trying to continue to just surrender and get out of the way and be in the present moment and trust that even the mistakes are divinely kind of perfectly orchestrated, and remove the judgment, And so I struggle with, I was going to go to like saying no. So I got invited to your dinner last night, and I was out of town for a week. I come home on Wednesday, the day before, and my daughter's like bummed that I said yes to this dinner. And I really I always struggle with what is the right thing to do. Like, I'm just trying to really hone my discernment, because I was like, I felt drawn to come to this dinner. I felt drawn to connect. I'm building a business. I'm trying to grow my brand, and it wasn't all that motivated. It just felt right to come and commune with you, because you and Skylar always bring together amazing people, and just to hang with you is a gift. And so I guess like I'm struggling with like, how do we know what's kind of good stress, and or maybe I'm just struggling with like time management, like choosing what is.
Wow.
Do you know what I'm saying? I don't know. I'm people pleasing, I guess, but I'm not. I'm pleasing myself, but I'm struggling with being there for my daughter when she wants me, but like the connection was so deep and beautiful, and I really am trusting where this animation is moving me these days.
Well, firstly, please pass my deepest apologies on to Riley. And the thing about our children, though, is they're watching us. Their radar is up. I often say they never listen to me, but they rarely fail to imitate me. So I have 3 girls. I know that they're witnessing their mother and me work both on ourselves and for ourselves. And they've internalized that behavior. So what you're really doing is you're leaving footsteps in the sand. So don't sweat it. Like, yeah, of course Riley wants to be with you, and you want to be with her. Mm-hmm. But what she sees is her mother forging a brave path forward, dedicated to helping people heal. And that's the most precious gift that you can give her, is to be that model exemplar, which you are. So if you miss a night, don't be too hard on yourself.
Thanks. I know. We have a date tonight, so we're good. I want to talk about, I think I say in my book, because dis-ease, the opposite of dis-ease is health. So health must be some version of ease. Mm-hmm. And there's some challenges to that, because I agree. Ease means to me like balance and flow. Everything is kind of in balance and alignment with how it's designed by creator, by intelligence, by nature. And also we think of like convenience and comfort of these world that gives us ease. But it's also the conveniences and comforts are making us sick. So can you speak to ease and the two kind of versions of it?
Absolutely. I think we've miscategorized ease as, tonight I'll just sit in a temperature neutral environment, kicking back on a lazy boy, door dashing in some Chick-fil-A, and binging some Curb Your Enthusiasm.
That sounds awesome.
I know, right? So the thing is, it does. And that is the tantalizing component of it. And it is a delicious way to spend a Friday night, and I won't hold it against you. But everything that I just said really, in the long term, creates a lot of dis-ease. It's that short-term embrace of everything that is convenient and comfortable that actually hijacks our engineering, because that is not how we evolved. We did not evolve with DoorDash and Chubby Hubby, or endless exposure to blue light, or a little knob on the side of the door that monitors temperature, and you don't even have to get up anymore. it knows Kelly likes 72. So it just...
So wild.
It just titrates for you. And, you know, all of those things, if you start to break them down, you know, with enough geekiness, you know, we know that exposure to blue light at night is going to mess up our circadian rhythm and disrupt the balance between cortisol and melatonin, right? We know that we have these little intrinsically sensitive neural ganglion cells, these sensory neurons in the inferior part of our retina that are susceptible to blue light and that set off our suprachiasmatic nucleus and the pineal gland to secrete melatonin at the wrong times of day, whatever, all that shit that you can hear on Andrew Huberman's show.
Yeah.
Right? All that stuff is true, though. You know, we evolved in relationship to a degree of Paleolithic stress. We woke up. We lived outside. We woke up. We got that strand of the electromagnetic wave spectrum at 480 nanometers, what we call blue light. We got that in the inferior part of our retina. Yes, that did set our circadian rhythm properly. Yeah, we didn't stuff our mouths with food all day, every day. A certain amount of abundance came in the late summer and early fall, and we would gorge on figs and wild game and what have you. And then there would be the paucity of winter's fallow, like right around the corner. And that restriction of calories that was built in seasonally to our lives not only kept us lean, that was nice, no obesity rates back there on the Serengeti, but also activated what we now know as all of these pathways for resilience and longevity. You've had people much smarter than me talk about AMP kinase and processes like autophagy, you know, the breakdown of dysfunctional proteins into their amino acid component building blocks or whatever, or mitobiogenesis, the creation of new mitochondria in response to calorie deficit. You know, or the activation of the sirtuin pathways that, you know, regulates the performance of DNA, etc. All of these things that happen when we're a little bit stressed, when we're a little bit deprived of calories. But now, of course, we live in a world where ease is everywhere, where winter essentially never comes. So you can dial up a summer squash in the middle of winter. But, you know, that's not generally what you're doing. You're dialing up something
Chick-fil-A.
much more Machiavellian. Yeah. And this is everywhere, everywhere. I mean, even what we're doing right now, sitting in a chair, although this is a nice chair that keeps me relatively pert, but I'm not using any of my back muscles, really. I'm sitting at 90-degree angles between my knees and my hips and stuff like that. This is not how we did it for hundreds of thousands of Homo sapien evolution and millions of years of hominid evolution before that. We squatted. We sat in a resting squat, and it was totally fine. And we were using our muscles, and we were aware and ready to jump if we needed to. But, no one had knee replacements back then. Of course, you couldn't get one. But, this is why I've started to now integrate all of what I call these kind of Paleolithic stressors, or these stressors of inconvenience, or I should say protocols of inconvenience into my life. And that's where things like fasting, or exposing yourself to fluctuations in temperature, or sitting in a resting squat instead of kicking back in a lazy boy. Those are way more adaptive. And what they actually do is they lead to the real ease that we want, not the fake ease. Now, the real ease is, we experience it in a couple different ways. I experience it when I'm in deep sort of creative immersion. So when I completely lose sense of linear time, and that might be playing music or writing, I often lose it. I often feel that sense of kind of true, sincere ease in collective enterprise. So last night, we're sitting around the table. I'm completely there, 100%. I'm not brooding over something in the past and projecting it into the future. I'm not worried about something and I'm feeling like I'm being judged. There's no clutch. It's the clutch that makes you feel the ego, that makes you feel like a separate self. No, you're just there in collective enterprise, doing something quite beautiful. That is true ease. Sometimes with sports, or when you're swimming in the ocean, right? When I'm playing tennis, And we call that flow state sometimes, where you have complete awareness of your body in space and time. For me, when I'm there, when I glimpse it in tennis, it's like I intuitively know where the ball is going to come before the player even hits it. You're like, well, how does that work? But this is like a true other level of real ease. And sometimes I think we can even taste it. Like, we know what like an ethylene gassed tomato that we buy at Vaughn's tastes like.
Oof.
Not good.
Doesn't taste like anything.
Yeah. But we also know what that fecund, bursting, sweet tomato tastes like when we grew it in our backyard. Mm-hmm. And that required a degree of inconvenience. We had to prep the soil. We had to lay the compost. We had to tend the seed. We had to get the right amount of water and the right amount of sun. We had to prune the leaves. But then what did we get from that inconvenience? True ease. Something truly beautiful. Mm-hmm. So I think we need to sharpen the point of our understanding of what begets real ease. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes that requires a bit of inconvenience.
Yes. As you're talking, I'm thinking of, and I want to get into raising daughters in a second. I'm going to tap into you're ahead of me. You got three and they're a little older. But you shared a beautiful story last night about your oldest daughter. Mm-hmm. And as you're talking about ease, like you said, I see you earlier, and that makes me feel loved, like understood, seen, like you just feel you can relax because you don't need to do anything. You're just like, I feel seen. That's like the new I love you, you know? And safety in relationships, in community, in society is such a big part of health, right? Feeling safe so that we're not stressed in the kind of fight or flight sympathetic nervous system sense of the word. And just, I'd love you to share that story about safety that your daughter shared, or one of your highest compliments.
Sure. So yeah, I have three girls, and we lived in New York for many, many years. And my wife was brave enough to have them at home. And there are a few decisions in life where you completely yield to your wife, but that's definitely one of them.
Childbirth. Skylar is like, a badass. Wow.
I was like, I yield to your best discretion. So we lived in Brooklyn, and we had a little summer cottage on the shore of the Long Island Sound, but on the Connecticut side. And so we had a weekend ritual to drive up there and to spend family time together, and we would bring friends up. It was a wonderful, wonderful way to spend time. But we had a rule. We had a family rule, which is that we would only drive at night. And that was generally dictated by the insane levels of congestion and traffic on I-95. Anyone listening on the East Coast is very, very well aware of how difficult it is to get out of the clogged arteries of New York City on 95. But at nighttime, it's a little bit easier. So there I would be, Dad in the front, Skylar bravely co-piloting, and the three girls in the back. Micah generally in the car seat on the right, Lolly on the left, and Phoebe, because she was a little older, in the middle. So there I would generally be knackered after a long week, sort of like squinting from behind the wheel, and then we'd go out through Rye and Mamaroneck and New Rochelle and Stamford, Norwalk, all those towns. And then you'd hit New Haven. And after New Haven, the road became narrow and more serpentine, and the street lamps disappeared. So it was very, very, very dark. And I would be driving up, and Phoebe told me this story as we were kind of reminiscing a few months ago. She's like, I remember when we would go and it would be so dark and I'd be in the middle and be looking out that windshield, and there would be beetles and moths and June bugs splattering against the window. And I'd look over, there'd be some like roadkill on the side, and we'd be passing some wobbly 18-wheeler, and I looked out at the big, mean, cruel external world into the obsidian blackness of the night, and it was so utterly scary. And then I would turn my head and look at you behind the steering wheel, and I never once felt unsafe. And I've categorized that as the greatest compliment that I've ever received, because I know what she was really saying. I mean, she was describing an explicit experience, but what she was really saying to me is that throughout my life, you as a father have always kept me safe. And as I've kind of meditated on that conversation that I had with Phoebe over the last couple months, and thinking what I know also about the human nervous system, I realized what a gift that can be that we give each other. I mean, certainly as a father to his girls, but as friends and colleagues, and that it is really in safety that the aperture of our attention can widen, that we actually trust the world around us, that we become less obsessed and more connective, less self-obsessed, I should say, and more connective, where we become really, truly creative in that space. It is within that kind of compost of safety that the garden of your creativity and connection can truly, truly grow. And it was just, it was a beautiful gift that she gave me to recognize that and tell me that story.
Oh, I love it so much. Thank you for sharing again. I could listen to that over and over and over.
Yeah.
I think safety is a big issue right now because not everybody could have Jeff Krasno as their dad.
Thankfully.
But for people, and there's so many of us struggling to feel safe in today's world, or on social media, or just in their body, whatever it is. Certainly in this country, a lot of people are feeling that way. In COVID, almost everybody felt that way. What are some of the protocols, or what do you say? I know you talk about the psychological immune system. How can you, or what would you say to guiding someone to cultivate safety within themselves in a crazy, scary time, potentially?
Yeah. I mean, we need to build the capacity as humans to bring ourselves back to center, to emotionally regulate, to find psychological homeostasis. You can say it a whole bunch of different ways. Because the world right now, or I would say kind of the attention economy or the persuasion economy, is out to trigger you, right? And it is important to kind of understand and untangle sort of the adaptive qualities of stress. Like if you're taking a hike in the trails and you come across a rattlesnake on the path, that involuntary bottom-up stress response is incredibly adaptive, right? You know it when you feel it. Your heart rate and respiratory rate start to increase. Your liver titrates just the right amount of glucose out. It gets sent to your extremities to fight or flee, right? The aperture of your attention becomes very narrow. Maybe your pupils dilate, etc. And then, the rattlesnake realizes that, oh, well, Kelly is not going to be on the specials menu today, whatever. Like, just slithers off into the high grasses. And what happens, Kelly bounces back to her parasympathetic state, right? Her heart rate and respiratory rate decrease, etc. The problem with modern society is that for so many people, metaphorically, the rattlesnake never leaves the path. So then we actually need to develop emotional regulatory techniques in order to move ourselves back to center. And there are many available to us. I mean, the most obvious ones are kind of breath work and meditation. Breath is sort of a kind of direct conduit. It's something that can be voluntarily controlled to actually influence the involuntary. So it's sort of a window or a conduit into what is happening under the crust of consciousness. So yeah, there's certainly many, many, many breathwork techniques. I will not mimic them here. But there's other ones that might be more surprising in some ways. Like crying, actually discovered, is an emotional regulatory technique that we often sort of vilify. And, you're just weak. What is this sanctimony here, crying? But when you actually are shedding emotional tears, if you were to take those emotional tears and put them in a chemistry laboratory, you'd actually find stress hormones in there. Adrenocorticotropic hormone, I think, ACTH. So when you're crying, you're literally flushing stress out of your body. Wow. There's also other physiological processes associated with crying. Generally, crying makes you go, makes you take a deep breath. Yeah. And we know that is emotionally regulatory. It's funny when you actually study how other animals emotionally regulate. It's quite curious. I mean, we know some of them, like possum and dog, they shake, right? Or like a gazelle, even after escaping a predator, will run for 2 or 3 miles and metabolize that trauma, right? And that's why I think exercise, for all of us, we always feel better. I mean, partially that's endorphin creation, but we're literally metabolizing the trauma and the stress right out of each other. Other primates groom each other. Have you ever seen like gorillas? Yeah. So we could try that. Groom you a little bit and pick little nits out of your sweater. Won't do that here. But wolves, that's why they howl as groups, to reestablish social homeostasis after a traumatic experience.
Wow.
So we could also do some howling after the podcast. Perfect. Too. We could get everyone to everyone in here into a howling exercise. You might get kicked out of the studio, but I don't know. But this is why, we have to recognize what's available to us as a human species. And, certainly crying is one. Activating conscious breath work that induces a parasympathetic state. Certainly meditation, actually being able to witness thoughts, emotions, feelings arise and subside in consciousness moment to moment without attaching to them. Just witnessing them appear and disappear without attaching any judgment to them. That's hard.
So hard.
Yeah. I mean, I categorize it now, that practice, as a good stress because it's wickedly hard to sit on your ass and do nothing.
Yeah.
And so this is why I think mindset, really, the ability to train your mind to move itself back to a state of equilibrium is maybe the most important protocol, because every experience of reality is perceived through the prism of our minds. I don't know where that leaves you.
What I would ask is, if Jeff Krasno still gets triggered today with all of your knowledge and wisdom, or you're having a deeply intense emotional experience like grief, loss, rage, I don't know what it would be, but like, how do you move through, like, what are your tools to move through or practices that intense emotion?
Yeah, it's actually interesting. Some of the most potent psychological tools that I have are actually physiological protocols. So obviously we associate fasting with many of the physiological benefits. And yes, there are many. It was central to my healing experience. I lost a ton of weight through an intermittent fasting protocol. That said, you don't necessarily lose weight with an intermittent fasting protocol because you can still eat a lot of pizza in an 8-hour window. But generally, when you're making conscious decisions about your consumption of food, you're making other conscious decisions. And, I poked at a few of the other physiological benefits, autophagy and ketosis and metabolic flexibility and sirtuin pathways, etc. But when I started to adopt this 16-8 protocol, in which I consolidated all my consumption of food in an 8-hour window, it didn't mean that I didn't get hungry at 9 p.m., right? But because I became a disciple, I suppose, to that particular practice, I didn't mindlessly meander over to the larder every time I was hungry.
Mm-hmm.
I actually was forced to witness the nature of the hunger and untangle whether or not the origin of that hunger was a biological need or a psychological desire.
Yes.
And of course, with any degree of rigor, 99.99999% of the time, I was eating my feelings at 9 p.m. at night. There's enough warehoused fat on this organism to last for a good month.
I don't know if there really is. You're pretty thin.
But what I'm saying is that my hunger was not a biological need.
Right.
It was a result of, boredom, or maybe something wasn't going well at work, or someone insulted me on X or whatever. And so fasting, which is considered generally a physiological protocol, helped me to find the space, in the Viktor Frankl sense, between the stimulus, the hunger, and the response, sort of the mindless trip to the refrigerator. And in that space, there was a choice. And in that choice, yes, was my freedom and liberation, if I'm going to stay true to Frankl. But more, there was an opportunity to actually be honest with myself and have a more appropriate response to the stimulus. And that began to punctuate and spill over into other areas of my life. So when my obstreperous children, who and they inevitably try to annoy me virtually every day, instead of just having a knee-jerk reaction to them and acting inappropriately, I had a space available to me. And that space would then examine, what is the provenance of their behavior right now? Maybe they had something at school that didn't happen right. Maybe they've got a riff with one of their friends. Maybe the teacher was inappropriate. I don't know.
Biochemical hormones happening through a teenage girl. Yeah.
And that space allowed me to have a more appropriate response to their behavior. So that, what was initially a physiological practice of fasting, for me, the most potent component of that was actually psychological and emotional.
Wow.
The same thing was true for cold water therapy, for ice baths. Yeah, there's the protracted release of dopamine over a 48-hour period when you get into cold water.
The vascular fitness.
Yeah, all this stuff. Wim Hof came. Were you there when he came to my house? So he was there for 3 weeks. Okay.
Oh, shoot.
And he would parade all sorts of folks in, and he'd give me first you do the breath, and you get into the ice, and it stimulates the anti-inflammatory cytokines and the IL-10 and all this stuff. And I was like, oh, wow, okay, I hate the cold. But Wim Hof is here, so I guess I'm getting in.
Yeah.
And then, he taught me a lot about, the physiological components or downstream impacts of getting into cold water. Yes, you have this built-in adaptive response to your core body temperature plummeting, right? What do? The first thing you do is like, right? And your heart rate, respiratory rate go up and all that stuff. But, your mitochondria, largely in this brown fat tissue, but in other tissue too, uses energy substrate to make heat. And you have a response that brings your body back into that warm porridge of 98.6. So your body is always designed for homeostasis. It's always designed for equilibrium. But as it pertains to the psychological or the emotional resilience that getting into the cold elicits, I think that's really where the magic is. Because when you get in there, like you say, you have that big gasp and you can feel that epinephrine coursing through your veins. I feel it in my neck. It's like coming up here and like I'm going to have a panic attack. And then, again, there's that opportunity, that space to apply top-down conscious pressure on top of involuntary bottom-up response. And if you can, and that often that is through breath work, but it can also just be through leveraging your brilliant neo-mammalian rational brain and say, Kelly is going to be fine. It's 50 degrees in this water. I'll be totally fine, And the more that you can enhance that capacity to put top-down pressure on involuntary bottom response, again, that spills into the rest of your life. Because inevitably, when you're in traffic or when you're at the dentist or when you're in a stressful conversation or any other artifact of modernity that produces stress, and there are so many, then you have that same ability to put conscious top-down pressure.
Yeah.
And so this is, again, I think where physiological self-imposed stressors in the right dosage actually have very, very potent psychological effects.
Makes you so much more resilient so that you can find balance in a modern life of convenience and comfort. So it's like, I want a life of convenience and comfort, but I know that if I succumb to the lazy boy and the Chick-fil-A and the DoorDash and the blue light Netflix and chill, it will eventually make me sick. So I have to balance with these kind of conscious resilience building practices of good stress that you've laid out here so brilliantly in this book.
Well, thank you. I mean, we know this in the simplest form by when we overload a biceps muscle, let's say, what happens? Like we tear the microfibers in it and there's an immune response. So there's a temporary inflammatory response. And then the body miraculously has an adaptive response built in. We didn't even have to think about it. It's built in to then activate these structural proteins, myosin and actin, and you give the thing enough rest and you eat enough chicken breast or leucine or whatever protein. Yeah. And guess what happens to it? It grows back bigger and stronger. And that is really the core message. What doesn't kill us will make us stronger. And our bodies are designed for that. Yeah,
absolutely. This is kind of a random question, but maybe in your research you have, it's personal because I'm renting a house and the owner is like, I wanted a regular sauna because we don't know the research on an infrared sauna and I think it's going to kill us, or I don't know what he said, but it was really funny. And I've been using infrared saunas for the past however many years. And I tend to run hot, so I kind of favor the infrared vibe. It's a little less in your face, bake me, turn me tomato red. And my brother just texted me yesterday. He's like, I'm looking at getting a sauna. Should I do infrared or regular? So do you have any thoughts on that?
Okay. I will just, with the caveat that I'm certainly not an expert here. And there's dozens of people, probably hundreds of people that probably know more about it than I do. I think that they're both have benefits, but I think the benefits are slightly different.
Great.
And there's a lot more data around dry saunas because the crazy Finns, I think, have like a sauna for almost every person. It's kind of like New Zealand has like a sheep, like 10 sheep for every people. It's like Finns have like 10 saunas for every people, whatever. I think you can fit the entire population of Finland in a sauna at any given time. So there's a lot of data that has come out of that. And Rhonda Patrick, who you may have crossed paths with over the years, she's put this has collected all that data into meta-analyses. And, there is real good data that dry sauna, if you do it, I think 20 minutes per day, that's the session duration, 4 to 7 times per week at a temperature between 170 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit, has inestimable benefits, particularly to cardiovascular health, but to all-cause mortality. There's also all these other benefits associated with it around the activation of certain proteins, like heat shock proteins that maintain the three-dimensional shape of other proteins. the activation of BDNF, so that's a protein that gets talked about a lot now, brain-derived neurotrophic factor that helps the brain grow new neurons and maintain the functionality of other neurons. This is, obviously there's some detox benefits as well, and some endorphin creation. It also sort of simulates kind of zone 2 cardio, more or less. And you know that when you get into a hot sauna, your heart rate goes up a little bit. This is all really, really proven out in a lot of clinical data for dry saunas. I think that the data around infrared saunas is more in its infancy, just because they haven't been around as long. But if the technology is obviously different, a dry sauna heats the air that then heats your body, right? With an infrared sauna, you're actually heating the body directly through infrared radiation. So those are like those longer waves that then penetrate the body almost up to like 8 centimeters, I believe, because they're long waves. Yeah. And they will have a different impact than a dry sauna, particularly at the intercellular level. So because they're so penetrative, it's the first time I've tried to use that word, probably, that they will actually go into your mitochondria and stimulate the production of antioxidants like intracellular melatonin, not to be confused with serum melatonin, but intracellular melatonin is a very, very potent antioxidant. Glutathione, that's a better PR agent.
I was going to say, I know about glutathione.
But these will be stimulated at the mitochondrial level with an infrared sauna. That's a different kind of benefit than what a dry sauna will offer, just because of the technology is different. I don't know if infrared saunas have the same sort of cardiovascular benefit. I just don't know. I just haven't read enough about it. But they're much more convenient. You can fit them inside, your home, in a little, like a singular one. And, I'm way pro sauna. So you're probably not going to get anything negative out of me about sauna. Sauna is my natural habitat. I'm in one every morning.
Are you? Infrared or dry?
Dry.
Okay.
Yeah, I have my little, non-negotiable morning protocol of contrast bathing, of dry sauna, very hot, usually 200 degrees. And then I'll go back and forth a couple times depending on my schedule.
And what's the cold water temp?
The cold water temp is actually not that cold. And that is the kind of interesting data point around cold water therapy, is that because a lot of people want to know that. They want to what degree should I put my cold plunge at? And cold is completely subjective. It actually has to just feel a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so I think mine's at 50. So that's uncomfortable enough for me.
Yeah.
And but this is where you can increase duration and decrease temperature as you push the edges of your discomfort. And this is a really important point more generally around good stress or adversity mimetics. Is, I think Paracelsus said, the dose makes the poison, right? You don't want to take your first cold plunge at 34 degrees in the same way that you don't want to take your first run as the Boston Marathon. You want to just play with the edges of your discomfort, where it really is disruptive, and then you push a tiny bit more than that and then move back. And the more that you do that, ironically, the better your body gets at fostering homeostasis. And if there is one single concept that represents health, it is really this idea of balance. It's our body's ability to move back to center and find homeostasis. And you see that every single place in the body. this kind of teeter-totter balance between excitatory neurotransmitters and inhibitory neurotransmitters, between anabolic pathways and catabolic pathways, growth and repair pathways, mTOR and AMPK, insulin and glucagon, cortisol and melatonin, oxygen and carbon dioxide on some level, pH balance, blood glucose balance. Everywhere in the body, this is what you should be trying to do, is instantiate that ability to foster that balance, that dynamic homeostasis.
Yeah, I had this download one time. I was like surfing the axis. The polarities are there. It's like getting those practices where you can surf once it's tilting in this direction, like surf back to the middle.
Yeah, this is the middle way.
The middle way.
It's a central concept to both my physiological practice and my spiritual practice.
Well, thank you so much. Again, everybody, the health benefits of doing hard things, good stress. This is like a Bible for resilience and health and wellness and happiness, really. Although you might not be happy for that moment in the cold plunge. But it's, it's good stress. I do love that. The biggest takeaway that I'm really grasping onto is all these practices that give us that ability to, in that moment of discomfort where we want to go eat or grab a drink or get the heck out of the cold water or whatever, it just like observe oneself and have that space of reflection between stimulus and response, and to continue to grow that power and awareness and self-awareness and, kind of capacity is the key. So cool. Yeah. Well, where can people find you? What? And the book and
you want my address?
Yes, Topanga, please.
Great.
No.
Well, I scooped up goodstress.com, so if you're interested in the book and supporting my work, you can go there. And really, Commune is it's not even a baby anymore. It's sort of a pimply, malodorous adolescent.
Very wise one. A very wise one.
Commune is sort of my repository of just really the most unbelievable thought leaders and authors and teachers and mystics and sages and yogis and whatnot. And I've been fortunate enough to put them on one single platform. It's called Commune, and that's onecommune.com. And it's really through my relationship with all of those people, as you said, that I've been able to distill little kernels of wisdom that I've tried to translate into this book. I owe so much to those that came before me, and I'm just trying to stand on their shoulders.
Yeah, well, you're doing amazing. And you're keeping them connected and lifting them all up. So I love you. Thank you for coming, and this has been fun.
Thanks, Kelly. I really deeply appreciate you.
Thank you for listening to the Heal with Kelly podcast. Be sure to tune in every Thursday for more empowering wisdom and inspiring healing stories. And make sure you hit the follow button on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss that one episode that holds the answer you've been searching for. Oh, and if you found this episode inspiring, please rate, review, and share Heal with Kelly so that we can grow our audience and reach more people. We truly appreciate it. Lots of love.